Our second reading for this morning comes from the book of the prophet Hosea. This is part of a larger set of teachings, of visions that the prophet shares with wayward Israel, who is under immediate threat from the empire of the Assyrians. Listen for what the Spirit might speak to us this morning through these words. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. The more I called them, the more they went from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and offering incense to idols. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness, with bands of love. I was to them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them. They shall return to the land of Egypt, and Assyria shall be their king, because they have refused to return to me. The sword rages in their cities. It consumes their oracle priests, and it devours because of their schemes. My people are bent on turning from me. To the Most High they call, but he does not raise them up at all. How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? How can I make you like Admah? How can I treat you like Zeboim, two places famous for their total destruction? My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and no mortal, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. They shall go after Yahweh, who roars like a lion. When he roars, his children shall come trembling from the west. They shall come trembling like birds from Egypt, and like doves from the land of Assyria, and I will return them to their homes, says Yahweh. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Nowadays, they're more likely to be on our smartphones or tablets than they are in an actual album with real pages. But wherever it is they're located, most all of us have probably had the experience of thumbing through a photo album. We have reminisced via photographs, looking at a time when things were different, when we looked different, when perhaps the future looked different. Now that my own children have officially become adults and gotten out of college and have jobs, it's a bit more poignant for me to look at those old photos of them as babies, as toddlers, as children. Different photos can produce different sorts of emotions and feelings. Some are filled with feelings of joy and warmth and happiness, and others feelings of sadness or even regret. Now, on the child-rearing front, Sean and I were quite fortunate. We had the typical difficulties, but both of our daughters managed to arrive at adulthood without too huge a number of missteps on their part or on ours. We had ups and downs, but things seem to have turned out pretty well. And on that count, I consider myself very lucky, because I know this is not always the case. Things can and do go horribly awry in the course of raising a child. And those who have had such experiences, well, I think looking at those pictures is probably much more difficult for them than it is for me. And when children or parents have gotten caught up in their bad choices and it has led to estrangements, then looking at pictures of those previous times, times of happiness and hope and promise for the future, must be terribly painful. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up in my arms. I was to them as those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them. God thumbs through the divine photo album, and God is distraught. God has tenderly cared for Israel, and in the picture the prophet paints, we see a God who is feminine, motherly. God has lavished affection on Israel, done everything that a parent could possibly do, but Israel has been a rebellious child from the very beginning, and the more God has called, the more they have gone in the other direction. They seem hell-bent on self-destruction and oblivious to all that God has done for them. Now, all of us have a capacity for self-destructive behavior. All of us have done those things, said those things that we know we shouldn't, that we regret as soon as we say or do them. And I know that I get frustrated, even angry with myself at such moments, but I think it is much more difficult to watch children, one's own children, engage in self-destructive behavior and not be able to do anything about it. One of the Bible commentaries I read said, "The divine response is not unlike that of the most loving parents who are never more angry with their children than when they engage in self-destructive behavior." Looking at Israel and where their foolishness and rebelliousness has taken them, and looking at those old pictures of an infant that has been lifted to her cheek, God simply can't handle it. God's heart is wrenched with feelings of love and feelings of anger, and the prophet depicts a God literally in anguish. But out of God's own internal turmoil, hope arises. I've long thought these were some of the most poignant words in all of Scripture. How can I give you up, Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? My heart recoils within me. My compassion grows warm and tender. I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and no mortal, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. Now, of course, this does not undo the destruction that Israel has brought upon itself by its own foolishness. Israel will still be conquered by the Assyrians, just as the prophet has said. But God will create a way home. God will restore and heal and reconcile. But the image the prophet Hosea uses to depict God's compassion and reconciling behavior is rather surprising. It is no kindly grandparent who pats Israel on the head and says, now, everything's okay. Rather, it is a lion whose powerful roar brings Israel coming back, returning home, trembling as she comes. Real reconciliation with God requires more than a forgetting on God's part. It requires a turning on Israel's part, on our part. It requires a turning toward God, toward God's ways, and it requires a turning away from trusting ourselves over God. And in the image of turning the prophet gives us, it requires for something to happen that shakes Israel, a roar that brings them trembling home. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. So goes the African American spiritual. I don't know that I've ever thought of Jesus on the cross as the powerful roar of a lion. But then again, the Apostle Paul does say that the crucified Christ is the power of God. And so perhaps it's not such a stretch to think of Jesus on the cross as the powerful act of God, determined not to come in wrath and to call us back. I've long thought that some Christian understandings of the cross and of the atonement, those where God has to punish sin and only Jesus can pay the price for all of us, are overly formulaic and mechanical, that they depict a God unable to forgive without following certain required formula that came from who knows where. I mean, is God really so hamstrung, or God's hands really so tied? Yet, forgiving and reconciling are two very different things. And the cross vividly depicts both the way that we humans grieve God's heart and the lengths to which God will go to draw us back. The cross is about much more than simply forgiveness. The cross is about new relationship. It is about the costly work of reconciliation, of reaching out to us even when we're the ones that created the breach in the relationship. It is a remarkable act of compassion and commitment to us. And when we truly realize what God has done for our sakes, it leaves us trembling. But more than just tremble, we return. We return and discover who we truly are, what we are truly meant to be. We return and discover that we are home. That all those longings and cravings that drive our hectic, stressed out, anxious lives have been lifted, replaced with true peace and fulfillment. Peace and fulfillment that the world cannot give. And as we come trembling home, prodigal God comes out to greet us and welcome us to the feast. And the risen Christ stands as our host, waiting to serve us, to feed and nourish us with the grace that transforms and equips us to live as the true children of God that all of us are meant to be. Thanks be to God.